So I'm thinking of this quote by Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, about how do you talk to your children about disasters and terrible things in the world. And he would say that when you're watching the news and you're watching the coverage, to just always point out all the people helping. To just draw your attention to the fact that everyone is helping. And I think what that's supposed to be is a way to anchor yourself in the fact that most people are good and most people are empathetic. And when it comes down to it, they'll do the right thing. And I don't really like talking about current events merely because I feel like these are letters or messages or conversations to people's past and future, to make sense of the past and to give something to the future. And I think that there's a tendency to want to think that there's something new and that there is something new under the sun. And when it comes to death and the thoughts of it, it's just the discourse, or whatever I'd call it. We want to think that death will change the world when death is the world. And it's been happening forever. And there's no particular narrative or movement. I mean, I think about Charles Whitman in 1966, 17 dead. No real explanation. I mean, he was abused as a child, had a perfectionist father. The Marine Corps made sure he knew how to shoot, because this was 1966. And, you know, he confessed to people around him that I think he went to a few psychiatrists and he said, like, I just feel this rage all the time and I can't quite locate it. And even after, I think even in the middle of it, he was still journaling, writing in a diary about how he's sorry and he hopes that his life insurance policy will provide for somebody. Like, crazy is just crazy, and it doesn't really need anything more to it. I think about, you know, in terms of ghoulish things, Patsy Cline, when she died in 1963 in a plane crash, people were already pawing at the ground for souvenirs while the wreckage was still flaming. Nothing new under the sun, so to speak. And, you know, when I think about death and memorials and so on, I just think there's something, I don't know what it is when you can feel it, but there are masses of people engaged in something where you can tell that there's really nothing to it. But there is something about 1,000 people just staying silently and having it not be about themselves. And I'm thinking of the vigil, and it was quiet. It was quiet, man. And there was no social disorder. There was no one screaming or hollering, even in the periphery. It's like there was just this field of reverence around what people were doing. And, you know, funerals and memorials and vigils are for the living, in the sense that is our reminder of the people helping, so to speak. We just need to remind ourselves that life has value and people have value. And you would want to know that if anything happened to you, that it would cause the same kind of reckoning and reflection in people, and to take a moment to think about it and to think about the finitude of life and where you're going. And I mean, I met one Vietnam veteran in my life, and, you know, he was my friend's father, and this guy had kids late, and I don't know if he made it to 70 but he took his own life in his 70s. Like, all the demons finally caught up with him. And this guy was, I mean, you know, he was nice and gregarious in one moment, and then the next, like a switch would flip, and he would be completely different, like a sort of dark, let's just say a dark cloud. And I remember half of the living room was dedicated to, I'm not making this up. It was a replica in like HO scale of a prisoner of war camp of the Vietnam era. And it took that long for it to catch up to him, you know. And I think about, I met this housing developer who grew up in the States, and he pulled some kind of, there's like a draft lottery system, and he got the one where it's just, you don't have to go. And that was it. And, you know, his house was palatial. I'll put it that much. I'll put it that way. And just the paths of life that your life can take so quickly. and how everything is just these split seconds and split decisions and split moments. And that's basically what I mean when I just say, like, the world is death. It's coming for everybody, and it's about understanding. I suppose it's something dark, but it's a force. It's like the black hole at the center of the galaxy. It's the thing that, despite it being the destroyer of worlds and the destroyer of life, it is the thing that propels us, and the thing which our very existence revolves around. And it's these moments to take some reverence, to remember that's what it's all about, to just take the perspective and to take the message. And so that's all that it has to be. That's really all that it has to be. And so in thinking about despair and suicide, first of all, I mean, obviously I'll give the caveat that I'm not a mental health professional. Don't take any advice. But, you know, I actually reached out to somebody that I haven't spoken to in a long time, who was kind of on the brink himself. And I said, I'm doing the show about despair and suicide. And he says, like, well, yeah, just make sure you tell him don't do it for me. Just be extra certain, because he ended up turning things around. And I think that at one point I had a conversation with him where I said, you know, they always find signs of people changing their mind at the last moments in suicides. They'll always find some sign that there was resistance to it in the end. And I just remember his eyes getting kind of wide at that. I don't know if he attributes it to anything, but, you know, just there are sometimes happy endings where this guy absolutely has something to live for now. And I had a coworker once that just sort of dropped it casually in a conversation when she was talking about her husband. It's like, yeah, and I don't know, I guess he tried to kill himself at one point, or like, blah, blah, blah. It's just there's something in the way that women will sometimes drop details like that, and just sort of within the banter. I mean, I love it, but it's just take a breath, take a pause, please. And I spoke to somebody once whose father killed themselves, and I remember him saying that the way that he described it near the end, his father, was, you know, you have a certain view forward in your life, and you can see 20 years ahead, 10 years ahead, 5 years ahead. And he said near the end, it was just sort of like he couldn't even think about what he was doing the next day. That is what true despair is like. Because I think about the things that plague me, the things that haunt me, and it's always just that there's opportunity and there's the most beautiful things in the universe just sort of, it seems like almost within your arm's reach. And there's a misalignment, or there's a misscheduling, or the stars have not aligned, and that's just not the way that it goes. And I think even when it comes to despair about missed opportunities and so on, I think, well, when you're despairing again about things that you can't have, I mean, but that's still something that you're feeling. I mean, much like death being that black hole at the center of everything, it's this longing to have something that treasured, and that's the way that you know that you're alive. I mean, it's both pain and elation that remind you that you're alive and that there's something worth it, and there's something worth moving towards. I mean, there was a mayoral debate at the Church of the State, the massive palace of the public library. And I mean, there were its disciples. And, you know, I'm kind of a debate nerd, so I watch these people and I score their rhetoric, and I see how they respond to criticism and how quickly they think on their feet and how much they read the room and if they're answering the questions under the questions. And, you know, half the time I'm watching the crowd to see what their reactions are to the politicians. And they're all very good answers. And I mean, if you want to talk about, you know, being within arm's reach of something, I think about Farkas's last bid for mayor. Poor guy. But, you know, that was the exact opposite of despair. He lost an election, and then he just becomes Forrest Gump for a while and just goes for climbs and runs and does everything but sit in the corner and lick his wounds. So, I mean, good on him. And, they're all very good responses and, as passionate as one can be. I mean, it's funny because the general rhetoric is just like, we're going to cut taxes and we're going to raise services. We're going to violate fundamental laws of thermodynamics, and we are going to lower taxes and increase services. We are going to increase efficiency by having multiple agencies upon agencies and committees upon committees to solve an issue. Like, it's absurd at this point, but, don't hate the player, hate the game, so to speak. But there is this guy, and I've never heard of him. He's an independent, Jagger Gustafsson. Jagger Gustafsson, I believe is the name. And he talked about populations of wild horses in Alberta, and presumably within the auspices and purview of the city, and about teaching kids nonverbal communication via how horses communicate, and their role in the ecosystem and all that. And I mean, he's not a crazy fellow. Like, this all makes sense. If anything, it's just simply too concept for the milieu. But there was this moment where he said, like, we're all here for the same reason. This flower on my boutonniere, like he had like a dandelion. He said, we're all here for this. There's some force. The same force that caused this flower to grow had us all show up together. And I'm like, God damn you, don't make me feel something at this. I'm here to be a passive judger. I'm here to gauge your rhetoric. Don't make me feel something. But it reminded me of the speech of Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men, where he's talking about when he tells him to flip a coin. He's just like, the coin got here the same way that we did. But and Chigurh is supposed to represent death, I believe, in the universe, and it's a very interesting thing to note in a candidate debate. And it's in thinking about despair. I mean, so God love them, but the people that have to run a city, I mean, they're talking about, if you compare them to, I don't know, Klein and Lougheed, or whoever the treasured mayors, the George Washingtons of Calgary, the Lincolns, like the people that everyone loves. You think, well, they were considered such great administrators because the monetary policy and the immigration policy were quite a lot easier to deal with, because these folks were in the city. I mean, even if they're puppets of the WEF, or even if they're grassroots folks, it's like 250,000 people a year getting added to a city. You're not going to be able to deal with housing. You're not going to be able to deal with transit or roads or busing or anything. Like, yeah, the Green Line took 25 years or whatever to make because no one could see that far in the future. Like, the social disorder and the problems with crime have a lot to do with the fact that it's just 250,000 people a year, and everything costs twice as much as it used to, just a few years ago. Like, there is nothing holding back what's happening with the federal government in the world at the moment, especially with what is frankly hyperinflation. There's really no fixing that via local legislative actions. And if anything, we're going to have to start relying on each other considerably more, because there's all these examples of, like, Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, and you've got Serbia and Croatia, and when there's massive breakdowns, there's a certain way to survive those things, and it would just be to rely on each other more and more. Like, if anything, I would just divert all of my resources from political theater and debating politics in a way that is frankly just, I mean, at this point it may as well be sports teams, to just rely on yourself and develop all those skills. And because when we talk about despair, I think, well, when the country is being tossed down a precipice, and the inertia and momentum of the financial system and fiat money and mass immigration I don't even think they know what their immigration policy is any longer. They just know that you cannot limit it in any possible way. Everything besides essentially infinite immigration and infinite money printing is the most evil thing. We are headed towards a precipice. And when the things that you build, you know that the world will change in the next couple of years. Your horizon, you don't think 30 years in the future. You don't think 20 years in the future. You don't think even month to month. I mean, it's come to the point now where people that are renting, like if they're late by a day with rent, even if it's like an accounting thing, like they linked their banking info to the different account or something, they get an eviction notice like within 12 hours of there being an NSF, and then there's a $50 fee. Like it's just the world is that unforgiving and that clamping down. And like I go to all these barbecues, and boomers and Gen Xers will talk to me about how their house doubled in value and they can't believe it. And it's just like, yeah, I know. I'm living the financial and societal reality that causes that to happen. You should take it as a sign that if an asset has doubled in value in the last 10 years, that, something is going deeply awry with the fundamentals outside the Overton window. And I don't get mad at them because, frankly, they would do the same thing that I would do and vice versa. I mean, that's not really something that we should be fighting each other over. But regardless, so when you talk about social disorder and law and order eroding and general despair among the population, you think, well, that's because the time horizon, much like this fellow, barreling towards killing himself, is just getting closer and closer and closer, and people in general just don't feel, what the next day is. But it is simply a matter of, you take the Farkas route where, yeah, he could have taken that to be a horrible, terrible thing that destroys him and demoralizes him. But no, you just keep acting as though you are going to win eventually. You keep acting as though the world is going to get better. You keep acting like that. You eat well, you exercise, you get sunlight, you look at human faces, you look at trees and leaves and evidently wild horses, but it's all about just acting it until it happens. Because when you think about, well, what is the ultimate engine of despair in the world? Like, when we think about this idea of hearkening back to this beautiful time, like, Canada under the Red Ensign or something, like in the 60s, back when, men were men and women were women or whatever. Well, everything that we're experiencing now is a direct consequence of those systems. So if those systems did not have an appropriate immune system to stop what happened 40 years, 50 years, 70 years hence, so how good was the system to begin with? So there was geopolitical happenstance, there was these oceans, there was the fact that air travel hadn't evolved to be so cheap. There was the fact that electronic banking didn't facilitate the amount of money printing that we're currently subject to. And so the systems of the past that everyone is hearkening back to and taking in as example, well, no, because again, they didn't have an immune system that could handle technological advancement and change. And I hate to break it to these people, but like human beings are all about change and progress and entering new epochs. Your system has to maintain its sanity despite the change. So what is the despair that enters everything? And it really comes down to the fact that it's lack of adaptability. That is the despair. It is one, we don't believe that we can adapt and we can change, and that we don't think that we can evolve with the world. And so we stick to this conservatism with no utility. That is what we live under. And so the despair comes from the fact that we're taking the signal that we've engaged in a broken system, and the broken system continues to break. That is the basis of our despair. That is the basis of our horizon shortening. And that's not it. We just need to act as though there actually is a future, because there is. There is actually a time of sunlight. There is all that stuff about the night being darkest before the dawn is absolutely true. And that's been the case since we were literally an hour away from freezing to death from the sun coming up. when that really, really mattered, and it's the same that is true now. So merely act as though you've got a horizon, because when you convince yourself that there is not a future worth living for, that's when it disappears.